Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Andy, I'm a vintage home decor reseller. I've been selling online and in person for about 8 years. I get so many questions as a content creator in the reselling space, and I thought I would go through some of the most common ones that I get. The juiciest being, can you make a full-time income being a vintage reseller? So I'm gonna answer that question and more in this video. So in case you're new to my channel, I became a full-time vintage reseller earlier this year. Before that, I had a corporate career, I had a consulting career, and now I'm doing content creation and vintage reselling full-time. It's definitely been a journey, and I will definitely be filming a video about this whole career transition for me, because if this is something that you wanna do, and I know there's a lot of people out there in corporate jobs wanting to make this transition, I will share the whole entire blueprint of how to do this, at least how I did it and how I was able to do it. I mean, it takes a little while. It's not an overnight success type of thing, and I'm still growing it. So that video is coming soon. But in a nutshell, can you make a full-time income as a vintage reseller? Yes, you can. But most people will never be able to do it. Now, I know that sounds like a downer, and the reason why I say most people will not be able to do it is because vintage reselling is a volume game, it is a quality game, and it's a marketing game. And if you're not good at those things, then you will never be able to make a full-time income. Now, a full-time income is dependent on where you are in the country and in the world. I live in Oregon. It's very expensive here. And so to replace my income, I had to combine reselling with content creation. Those two pieces together have made me enough money to be able to contribute meaningfully to my family and replace what I was earning. Now, some people, they might be just replacing a job that is not making as much as what I needed to replace, because you're in a state or country that you can survive and thrive on a lower cost of living, which in the West Coast of the United States is extremely expensive here. So it took me a little bit longer to reach the full-time milestone because of that. So I want to give a realistic picture of being a full-time reseller. I think a lot of people are misled by the get rich quick, I only work 5 hours a day, but I make $1 bajillion type of messaging that's out there. And vintage reselling is not that. You have to work all the time because you're sourcing all the time. A lot of the really good sourcing events like estate sales and markets are on the weekend. So you're working on the weekend. And a lot of the best sales days at antique malls are on the weekend. And so you're working a lot, and probably more than you would in your corporate job. So I just want to let you guys know. So yes, can you make as much money as your corporate job? Yes, but you might end up working more hours, although they're, I would argue, more enjoyable hours. So most of the successful full-time vintage resellers, they are very, very good at their sourcing, and they're also really good at marketing. And so if you want to go into business and not be on social media and not do any form of marketing, and you don't really want to do anything other than find the stuff and plop it into a booth, you may not be able to make a full-time income as a vintage reseller, because everyone that I know that does it very successfully is hustling and basically doing a lot of marketing, however that looks, social media or otherwise, or they're doing actual markets. They're doing a lot to get their product in front of potential buyers. And so it is not like a drop it and forget it, buy it and forget it type of business. You need to work hard to make the sales, whether they're online or in person. I think a lot of people fail to realize how much marketing is a focus when you're in a small business, when you start a small business, because reselling is a small business. You have to treat it like a small business, and then you have to market it like a business. And I think that marketing piece is really tough for people, and that makes it hard for people to actually make any sort of real meaningful money. And so I actually have a few videos about how to market your reselling business, kind of how to take it to the next level. I will link those videos down below or pop some on the screen, because my background is actually in marketing, and part of the reason why I've been able to make the transition to being a full-time reseller is because I have a strong marketing background. I've been able to leverage that knowledge. So for me, my main marketing strategy has been social media and YouTube. YouTube being the most powerful marketing tool you can use in order to sell your stuff. Like, I'm doing haul videos, I show something, I list it on Etsy, and then it sells very quickly because I have gotten in front of a very excited audience for my vintage pieces. And so for me, without social media and without my YouTube channel, I probably wouldn't have been able to make the transition to being a full-time reseller. And so that's something to kind of keep in mind as you're thinking about wanting to make the transition, especially if you're just getting into reselling. You need to take marketing very seriously if you want to reach those like income like milestones that you probably have in your mind, whether you're replacing income or just enough to support your family in a meaningful way. So yes, you can totally make a full-time income as a vintage reseller, but again, it's dependent on where you live and your costs of living, your family expectations in terms of contribution, and then how much you are willing to hustle for it, because this job is very hard, but it is very rewarding. So I'm one of those people that loves income reports and videos where the person or content creator is talking about how much they made in this whatever time frame it is. I actually filmed one of those videos earlier this year. It was like how much I made in 2024. And it was a very vulnerable video for me to film because I actually talk about my income and each of the buckets it came in. And it just was a realistic snapshot of someone trying to get to the pinnacle, which is full-time income replacing my consulting job. So if you've not watched that video, it's definitely worth a watch. I'll link it down below because I think it's like I said, it's a very realistic snapshot. It talks about how this is not a get-rich-quick type of business, but it definitely gives a person hope and a path. So if that's something that you'd be interested in learning more about, like I said, I'm going to be filming a whole, like probably video series about every step I took. But if you want a snapshot into just 1 year, me doing what I'm doing, I think it's worth a watch. Okay, so let's move on to some other questions that I get. One of which is, how do you start a reselling business? I know there's a lot of people out there that want to become a vintage reseller, but they don't necessarily need to be full-time. They just want to get into the business, most likely because they've accumulated so many vintage treasures that you get to the point where you have to sell them. That is most people's path to reselling, is because they are getting into almost like not hoarder, but hoarder territory where they don't have any more places in their home to put all the cool stuff that they're finding at estate sales or at the thrift store. Or the other side of it is they want to make a little bit more money for their family and they see people doing, quick flips and stuff. And so that's like enticing to them to help pay off debt. So if you're one of those people that really wants to get into the reselling game, whether you're dangerously close to becoming a vintage hoarder or you want to make some more money with for your family, I actually recorded a video on how you kind of can get started selling. And I will link that down below too. There's a lot of content around the questions I get asked most often that I already have filmed that people seem to have trouble finding. And so that's why I kind of want to bring up a lot of these videos that are good and ready to go that you can just, consume after this video. And they're all going to be linked down below in the playlist. But yeah, if you're interested in becoming a vintage reseller, and you haven't done it before, there's so many ways to sell, whether in person at markets or antique malls or online. It really depends on the inventory you get, how much flexibility you want to have. Do you want to ship stuff or not? There's all these questions that you need to ask yourself before you kind of start selling, because there's so many avenues to sell. And then of course you also need to make sure that you're treating your new business as a business from the beginning, which means you need to report your income. Your business needs to have a name. So this next question I get is usually by DM from someone super deflated, like they're just like gutted because they got their first bad review from a customer. So first and foremost, I want to say, bad reviews are not the end of the world. I know we take them all so personally and you will think about it for hours or days. You may even cry over it depending on how crazy the customer can get in what they say. And you just have to let it go and know that it's just part of business. I mean, we have not had good business experiences every time we've ever gone anywhere to shop, to eat, for an experience, that stuff just happens despite everyone's best efforts. That just happens. And so your business is not going to be the only one that's never going to get a bad review. You're going to get a bad review at one point. And sometimes it can be in the beginning when you're trying to figure stuff out. And other times it can be you're sailing along and then all of a sudden you're just hit with a bad review. So just know it happens and try not to take it personal. So now that you've accepted that bad reviews are just part of the process, what do you do when you get that message? So it kind of depends on the person and what has happened. If you have something break in transit, I use a lot of private insurance. I opt in for that often, especially for breakables and things that are going really long distances. That makes the claims process go that much quicker, and then the person gets to have their refund, and then I get to retain the sale amount, and everyone is not happy because obviously the item broke, but they get to a place that's advantageous for everybody. So I use private insurance quite a bit. You can opt into private insurance when you're buying your labels through Etsy. I'm sure there's something for eBay. I know if you're using Shippo or Pirate Ship, there's a way to opt in and put a dollar value on how much insurance you want. So anyways, private insurance and insuring stuff privately, being that it's so cheap and I kind of just have it as part of my, pricing strategy, has helped me mitigate and resolve a lot of these customer service issues related to breaking in general. So let's talk about buyer's remorse. Whether someone gets the item, they realize, actually I don't really want it, or I don't like how it is, or they get something like, wait a minute, this is totally different than what I thought I bought. And in those circumstances, I usually will go back to the pictures and the description and just see if I made any sort of mistake in identifying any sort of flaws or the coloring of the photos. And I look back at what was the condition of the piece, because I try to call out everything under the sun, because vintage and antique pieces, they have flaws. They have, cracks, chips, holes, scratches, you name it, and I tend to call all those things out. So if it's the customer not reading the listing properly or looking at the picture closely enough, in those circumstances, I may or may not give a discount. I usually don't offer a refund. I have a no refunds, no returns policy. Now, there have been very rare instances where I will have offered to have an item back. It just kind of depends on the item, how much I have invested, how much the piece cost to ship, and what that customer means to me. And I will analyze and whether or not accepting a one-time return makes sense for my business based on that situation. But usually the go-to for most resellers is to offer some sort of small discount. That way they feel a little bit better about the purchase, and that way you're not necessarily having to take a hit, and that may compel them enough to change their review. And the other thing that plays a role in how much you want to do, whether you actually want to accept a return or you want to give them a small discount, depends on how this request came to you, because some people are scorched earth, fiery, and they will word things as if you wronged them, their family, personally, and you should pay. And in those circumstances, they may never change the review if they did write you a bad review before they contacted you about what happened. And just some people are just bitter and there's nothing you can do for them. They are just going to always feel wronged. And sometimes with those people, you just you go through the motion of seeing if there's something you can do. And then if not, then you just have to, let it go. And a bad review is not going to tank your entire business. Most people know that every business is going to get a good review or a bad review, and any sort of visible bad review, I'll read them and I usually will make a judgment on, does this seem fair to the business owner? Is this accurate? Does this person seem crazy? Because, we all read the reviews and you're like, wait a minute, this is about something totally different than that vase you bought. There was something else going on in your life that day, and you decided to take it out on the vase and that business owner or Etsy shop rather than what is truly warranted. And so those types of reviews, most people are smart enough to recognize. And the way the reviews are displayed and aggregated usually doesn't always display the bad ones first. And it usually mixes them all together to be more fair, when someone is looking at your shop. So anyways, that's kind of my thoughts around reviews and what happens when you get a bad review. And you just have to kind of have some of these things in mind before you become a reseller. And then oftentimes whatever happens in that circumstance will also then require you to be thoughtful and maybe rethink your policies. But if you do have some policies that you can put in place, and especially in written detail on listings or in your shop policy section, that can help right off the bat, give you some sort of foundation to launch from when you're then telling people, well, per my policy, or like I wrote on the listing, or, that type of language can help diffuse the situation as well. So it's helpful to have that language ready and you're already using it before you kind of get these bad reviews, if you do. But remember, you're not going to get many bad reviews. It's every once in a while. unless you actually are doing something wrong all the time, which I know you guys are not. And finally, I want to highlight a few more questions that I get. I get asked all the time, how do I clean my brass? I actually have a video about that. I'll link it down below. All the products that I use to clean my brass, which is white vinegar and Bon Ami, which is a powder cleanser. I have that linked in my Amazon storefront in case you want to purchase it after watching that video. People ask me about my pricing strategy all the time. I have that linked down below. I've already filmed that video. And I get asked all the time, why do my prices online end in 8? And that's kind of based on retail strategy. If I wanted to get $60 for an item, if I price it at $58, then someone thinks you're kind of getting a deal. And so that's like the kind of the psychology aspect of having numbers that are just close enough to the next tier, but under. And if you go shopping, you will see this. You'll see a lot of stuff with 99 or 98 because that signals to someone that they're getting a deal. And so that's why I use those numbers and that ending of the number in most of my pricing. But I talk all about my pricing strategy in that video. And then if you have any questions about shipping, whether it's artwork or small furniture pieces or just everyday questions because you have never sold online, I have videos about that too. And then any of the tools that make my business run more efficient or just make my life easier, I have a whole Amazon storefront of those items, and those are things that I will recommend till the day I die because they make this business so much easier. And this business is involved. Being a reseller is involved, and I couldn't live without these things. So that's all I have to share with you today. If you have any more questions, I love doing these videos, so just pop them down below in the comments. Thanks so much for watching, and I can't wait to see you in my next video. Take care.